Questions. If you have a question, raise your hand and I'll call on you. Okay. And let's just get everybody relaxed. And just remember the roles we're in, and they are roles. That this is collective stuff we understand. I may have different little metaphor examples, but basically we're talking to ourselves through this format. And I don't know when I give an answer whether what I'm saying is totally distorted by my own clingings of mind. So I don't know whether it's useful or not. Only you know whether it's useful to you. So what I say, if it intuitively feels good, fine. Otherwise, send it through like Chinese food and just let it go, okay? Okay, questions, yes. I'll repeat the questions too.
When you have a person who has an attraction to you, and that becomes an aversion?
She said when somebody is attracted to you and they then develop a dislike towards you because they can't have what they want, which is they want to possess you, I guess, is what you're talking about. And then the question is, how do you deal with that with them? Is that for you? Basically. 60%, okay. I think there are two components. One is you always stay as close to your truth as you can. And the other is you cultivate the planes of consciousness so that you learn how to do what you must do with another person, but never put them out of your heart, which is the line of Kabir, the poet. Do what you do, but never put a person out of your heart. So you may be saying no to the person, and we can't have what your mind wants. But what you're doing is saying no to the actions, and you're not saying no to the person. And that all depends on the level of your being. And there's a way in which a person can be rejected in a way that their action can be rejected, in which brings them and you closer together. So as long as in your mind that person is a form of the beloved and you're open, then you can say yes or no depending on what feels appropriate within your world situation. Okay. What's the problem?
Well, what if the person has an aversion to you doing that?
If the person has an aversion to you doing that, that's their problem. You can't control another person's mind. You can just work on your own. So you work on your own to keep your heart open and be loving. Somebody may come up to me and say, you are the worst jerk in the world and I hate you. And I run it through and see if it's usable. And if it isn't, I let it go, And then they're stuck with it. It's like the Buddha, a man's children became devotees of the Buddha, and he was really upset because there was nobody going the family business. So he came to the Buddha and he upbraided him and yelled at him and angry at him. And the Buddha said, if somebody comes to your home, sir, and brings a gift and you don't accept it, what happens? Man said, well, they have to take the gift back. So the Buddha said, well, I don't accept your gift. Let's see. So that's what you got to do, Questions. What currently are my passions? It's interesting because it's very delicate to label them. I mean, there are moments when I feel very fulfilled by my life. But I wouldn't say they're passions in that same way. I mean, they're not things that I want other than this moment. I could say this moment is my passion. They change so deeply and dramatically, and that you got to keep letting go of the models of what your passion should be to hear what they are. There's a delicious story that I must share with you. It's about an older man. And he's walking along the street, and he suddenly hears a voice saying, "Psst, could you help me out?" And he looks around, and there's nobody there. "Psst, could you help me out?" He looks around, doesn't see anybody, and he's looking around, and he looks down, and there's a big frog. And the frog says, "Psst, could you help me out?" Man feels like a fool, but he says, "Did you speak to me?" And the frog said, "Yeah, could you help me out?" The man says, "Well, what do you want?" And the frog said, "Well, I'm under a curse, and if you would kiss me, I would turn into the most desirable young woman that would serve you and feed you and warm your bed, and it would be just so wonderful. We'd be together, and it would be such joy." Man stands there for a little while, reaches down, he picks up the frog, and he puts it in his pocket, and he walks on. For a little while, the frog says, "Hey, you forgot to kiss me." The man says, "You know, at my age, I think it's more interesting to have a talking frog." So it's hard to express my passions exactly. But come home and see my frog. Yes.
I find it very difficult to.
She said that she has a great discomfort because she's so often in the past or the future with her mind. I don't think the art is to push away the future or the past, but merely to enlarge the scope so that you're also in the present. I don't think it's instead of the future. The present should include the future and the past. So it's really coming back. Like if I get too caught in my mind, I'll come back to my breath, for example, which is just a very simple practice of following my breath, the rising and falling of the breath in my abdomen. That's all. And I've done that for 20 years, and I'll often go into training where I go to like a monastery for 2 months where I just do that, bizarre though it may seem, until I am stabilized in seeing that it's called a primary object, that one thought I can use to come back to every time my mind spins out into the future or the past. And it brings me back, and the quality of the breath is it's right here now. It's right here. This next breath is right here. So when you have a technique like that, that's a method. It's a method for remembering or centering. These beads are a method. Just using, I'll be talking and I'll get so fascinated in what we're talking about, the future or the past or this or that, and then I'll feel the bead in my finger. And one Ram will go through, or one name of the nameless, and suddenly the whole thing, this turns into just a dance we're doing together. And I'm seeing it from a quieter place in the present. So these are all methods you develop, and you've got to listen to hear what method works well for you. And sometimes it's just saying, I get so lost in the past and the future, then, okay, every time I remember, I'll just stop and just come into the moment, which will include the past and the future. It's not instead of it. It's all here. I know tomorrow I'll be on a plane for Minneapolis. That's here now. But also, I'm not busy thinking about going to Minneapolis tomorrow because I'm enjoying just this dialogue with you. And all of it's empty. And the going to Minneapolis and the dialogue with you all already happened, actually, from another place. It's like the monk that has a beautiful goblet, and his devotee says, "How could you have such a priceless goblet?" He said, "Aren't you afraid?" He says, "In my mind, it's already broken." So in a way, in your mind, you're already dead, so you can live. It's that kind of quality of levels. Now, that's a perceptual device for reminding yourself. Okay, is that dealing with your question?
Actually, I was also.
She says often around action, she freezes and she knows she should follow through, but she hesitates. That's the definition of who you think you are. I am somebody who freezes, should follow through, but doesn't. That's the definition of this moment. And I think all of it's open, it's all suspicious, it seems to me, to define yourself in any way. I mean, how do you know that the fact you can't act is because you're not ready to act? It's not the right moment yet. Couldn't you trust enough to, you're not acting is the action you're taking at this moment? Maybe your confusion, I mean, when people come up to me and they say, I'm confused, I say, wonderful. There's really an open possibility now. Something can happen. When you're busy knowing, what can ever happen, you know? So, yes. Have any advice about making the transition from somebody special to nobody being somebody, I assume? I think that don't get caught in the drama of something happening and going from somewhere to somewhere, because it's just another hype of the mind. That you end up being, I mean, in some way, look, I'm up here, I'm somebody special, but I'm not somebody special also. I'm nobody, and I'm also somebody special. That's why it's such fun. If I were somebody special, it would be a real drag, because I'd really need you to reassure me that I was as special as I needed to think I was. So it doesn't mean you change your role, it just changes the way you are in it, okay? So do it gently. It's not a big, now I'm leaving my somebody special, you know? Because they'll, yes. We got a little too far over on the pendulum swing towards individuality. A trapped identity, but acknowledging those gives meaning to the incarnation. It gives the form of the curriculum, in a way, as being a member of these various communities. So there are ethnic communities, there are religious communities, there are sexual communities, social communities, political communities. People, as they feel the alienation of being out of community, look around out of a very deep need of feeling separate to bond with other people, to feel that resonance of heart to heart. And what's very interesting is because our society has been so focused on individualism, and as a result has often felt so alienated, that alienation has led to all kinds of excesses. And in that kind of world of excesses, people band together around their excesses in order to form a community. So they bond around their pathology, really. So a group of people who are all drinking, for example, create an AA community. And they become very powerfully bonded, and it's around their pathology. And then their intimacy is through all being alcoholics who aren't drinking. That's the new identity. Now, that's very useful in helping them out of that addiction, but the addiction to being an alcoholic who's not drinking is another addiction. And so, as Ramakrishna said, that when you have a thorn in your foot, you take another thorn and you use it to get rid of the first thorn, and then you throw both thorns away. That the art form is to be in communities and not in communities at the same moment, whether it's family or nation state or ethnic or social, political, or economic community or anything. Right? Is that okay? Yeah. Yes. How long ago was it that your child died? 11 months. And how old was your child? 25. Well, first, just as an aside, let me say that as you probably noted, I've written, that the loss of a child is probably the hardest part of the illusion of existence, because it's so unnatural that the child should die before the parent. And it's such a ripping sensation. It's very hard to keep conscious in that situation. And the grief is very deep, and the grief must run its course. So that part of your wanting some conceptual model of afterlife is part of the way you are dealing with your grief. And it's important you understand that, and that you, because actually what we're dealing with and what happens after death is the mystery. We're dealing with a mystery in which we don't know. I can give you models from cultures, and I can take from my experience, I can tell you that awareness survives death. And I can tell you another thing, that to the extent that you and your child tasted of even one moment of real love with one another, of just beingness together, once you quiet down from the trauma of what has happened, and it may take years, however long it takes, you will quiet enough to appreciate that the essence of what you and that being have together still is. It didn't go anywhere. And that's an incredible awakening for somebody that's lost in grief around the form the love was experienced through. Okay? I'll share with you what I understand, but I don't know, because it is the mystery of consciousness. About suffering and death are both the mystery. They're both. And you can approach the mystery with trepidation, or with fascination, or with just openness. You don't know. What happens to a person at the time they die is very much a function of their evolutionary stage, which has nothing to do with their chronological age. It has to do with how old a being it is. If it's a very old and awakened and wise being, it's a being who is identified primarily with awareness and not with ego or body, so that at the moment of death, they do what is called dropping the body. They just discontinue that particular form of expression, but the awareness is continuous all the way through. That's a very old being that would have that kind of reaction. A new being, a being who has gotten deeply into thinking they are who they think they are, and in a kind of philosophical materialist universe, is frightened and pushing against death, and goes into some state of sort of unconsciousness at that point, and then goes on in a reincarnational sense, because the inertia of that attachment forces the next manifestation, which would be what would be called a reincarnation into another form. And in between that, all of us exist, somewhere between those two ends of the continuum. And some people, at the process of dying, get so fascinated with the process of dying that they lose their awareness, and they go through it, and they're sort of traumatized for a moment, and then awaken and realize they just got caught again, and oh, well, that completes that one. And my sense is that the power of the feeling you have with regard to your child suggests that your connection to that being is quite independent of this lifetime, in addition to being through this lifetime. So it's just you going through your mind changes until you don't try to demand a conceptual, rational understanding of it all, and just sit with the mystery and then feel the love all the time. That's the process. Is that a fair answer to your question? Sir? I think that's a good example of what we're talking about, because when Neem Karoli Baba left his body, he was the most important being in my life. And even though when I went to him, he always threw me out all the time. He'd always say, "Jow, get lost, split," which turned out to be, "What are you doing here? The light's everywhere," or, "What are you hanging around?" And what it left me with is he cultivated in me the connection to him that was deeper than the time and space connection of us being in a physical proximity to one another. So that when he died, a lot of people who were close to him physically were decimated. And I kept thinking I should be, but I wasn't. And for a long time, I kept alive the stories about him and the memories of him, and reran all the films of being with him. I even wrote a book, Miracle of Love, of 1,000 stories about him. And then I wrote the book in 78, and then he died in 73, left his body. And then I noticed the quality changing, that I started to relate to the qualities of him, like the purity or the humor or the rascality or the wisdom or the emptiness. I mean, these different qualities of him started to be my companions rather than the historical person or body through which they came. And then more recently, I've been doing a form of a Tibetan practice in which one imagines the root guru over one's head, and one feels appreciation and for that relationship, and then in the process, that being kind of falls down into you, and you start to merge with that. And there's the expression, "May your wisdom mind and my wisdom mind remain inseparable." And I can feel now that there are moments when the dualism between even the qualities disappears, and there's just isness with him. Oh, the word "with him" is not relevant anymore. It's just is. So I would say it's an evolving process with him, in which I think that to the extent that I'm in dualism, I would say I see the world as his gift to me to train me to bring him to him, which is not him at all, but which is that which is beyond himness. Is that dealing with the question? Yeah, sure is. Yes. Carl Jung and the archetypes and all that stuff. Carl Jung was somebody who attempted and did a remarkably beautiful work in opening up other planes of consciousness to help us understand the nature of phenomena. Yeah. The archetypes are like astral storylines. They're mythic identities, really. And my feeling in reading Carl Jung is that there was a place that he stopped, in which he wanted to remain the scientist. He wanted to remain the observer. He wanted to remain Carl Jung, knowing all this. And the predicament is that in the full mystical journey, you got to die, and then you aren't, and then it is. And then you can be Carl Jung, but you aren't. And there are moments in his writings where just little clues, like the statement after he's been out exploring into these other planes of consciousness, he said, "I was so happy to get back into my study." Just a line like that, you'll think, where does that come from? Who is that? Who does he think he is? You know, not in the negative sense, but just, wow. So I have that feeling of love, because I was a Freudian, and he certainly took us way beyond that level of understanding the unconscious into a much deeper way. But I do feel there's a limit when I read it. Sir? Well, first of all, I was not an advisor to Bill Wilson. I know people who were, but I wasn't. It's the first thing. But in terms of answering your question, I would say that the value of the 11th and 12th step is not being fully played out, I would say, I think. That if a person is on the journey of awakening fully, at some point they have to give up every identity. And the identity of being a member of any group is one of those identities they have to give up. But you can't do it prematurely, or you just got to go back and start all over again. So it has to be something where, to me, all methods, meditation, all methods are traps. For them to work, you got to be trapped by them. That's how bizarre it is. All you can hope is that at the end it self-destructs, so that you end up a free being with no definition at all. Now, I have, for example, gout. So I'm a person with gout. I'm not going around being a person with gout. But in fact, I do have gout, and I do take medicine for gout. In other words, I honor that my various identities, but my root identity doesn't have a definition like that. And I just want to encourage, because what somebody in AA does is goes from being needing the bonding to help them and the resonance to help them. Then part of their strengthening is their helping of other people, all of which is incredibly beautiful. I mean, I honor it all over the place. I think it's wonderful. And then comes to the point where you've got to go beyond all of that. You've got to go beyond all of that. And that's the point where it feels to me like when you've bonded that strongly in a group, it's hard to do that. It's hard to do that. So I would encourage people that are very, very advanced in AA to, if they are going to stay functional in AA, to help the organization deepen its 11th and 12th step, or to go on beyond the organization. Is that a fair answer to your question? Yeah. Sir? He said, how in the face of the kind of news like Bosnia, for example, how do you hold on to the feeling that it's all us? And where do you stand in relation to it is what you're asking, I guess. How do you interpret it? Well, you and I both can imagine people being under economically unstable conditions and under dramatic change, people who have developed a sense of somebodyness being very frightened. And when they're frightened, you can see them acting in ways that if they were more conscious, they wouldn't act. We all have done it many times. And there is, and that could lead to incredible injustices in the world, in which people join with others to feel strong, and they feel strong by disempowering other people. We've had remarkable examples of that throughout history. When the Buddha described who took birth on this plane of existence, he said the people that take birth have something to do with 5 different hindrances. Lust and greed is one of them. Hatred and ill will is another. Sloth and torpor is another. Agitation is another. And doubt is the 5th one. He said, that's who's here, first of all. So you almost say, what are you surprised about? I mean, why are you... I'm more surprised by this gathering, in a way, than by Herzegovina. I mean, in the sense of, it's more understandable that people who are caught in their separateness and their fear will do violence to one another. I can hear where that's coming from. And I can hear that that's part of who we collectively are. I mean, when we talk about the $1 trillion in arms, you and I may not have personally bought the arms, but we are part of a system that is buying the arms, and we're getting some benefit of those, and we are damn well part of the whole thing. And it's us. It's us that's starving those 15 million, and it's us. And we are the 15 million that are starving. That's what's... I mean, as you open to it, you see the poignancy of the human condition, of how lost it is out of balance in the issue of separateness and unity. And so, seeing all that with your heart heavy with it all, if you get caught in just the heaviness of your heart, you become dysfunctional in the whole situation. So the art is to work on oneself, to cultivate these perspectives, these planes of reality that are also you and are also them, so that you can stay, so that you are an instrument that is creating a force field around you in which that sort of thing isn't happening, basically. Or it doesn't have to happen. It doesn't have to happen. I mean, I walk into a room where somebody is dying in pain and frightened and angry, and I sit there until we both the opportunity is that we could both move into another place where we could see it from a different perspective. The suffering would be reduced immensely, and we could start to use that whole thing to come into some other harmony with the universe. And that's the work we have on ourselves. I mean, when I look at the news, I often meditate for a couple of minutes before I turn on the news. Because I look, for example, like Peter Jennings is a nice guy. He seems like a pleasant enough fellow, and I like him. He seems reasonable, like one of us. He is an us, but a certain kind of an us. Peter Jennings makes over $1 million. He works for a company that is a multi-billion-dollar organization. He can't help but unconsciously be selecting the news in a way to keep a certain reality real. There's no way he can not do it unless he were an enlightened being, which I don't experience Peter Jennings to be. So the media, which is the very bloodstream through which all of us are relating to one another, is presenting the illness of the whole system is running through the whole thing. That's preserving the ground conditions of economic inequity that leads to this kind of stuff like ethnic cleansing. I mean, you really are forced to go back to root causes all the time. And the deepest root cause is the ignorance of the human mind. But you can then go up levels of it to ignorance of economic inequality and injustice and stuff like that. So I see the phenomena in the world of pillaging and murder and on and on and on, and hardship and homelessness and injustice and violence and all that. I see it all as the wash of the human condition. And I always keep coming back to working on myself to be an instrument that will take all of that and allow. I'd like to be an instrument of it's being transformed into something else. And as long as I'm too overwhelmed by it and push against it, I am of no use, really. That's the predicament. It says in the Tao Te Ching, truth waits for eyes unclouded by longing. That when you're identified with something you want, like peace or nonviolence, you only see the outward containers. You don't see the essence of the truth. We don't even know why suffering exists. I mean, we're so busy being separate, frightened humans that we're busy judging the whole thing as if, like if I were God, I certainly wouldn't have screwed it up this way. I wouldn't have them do that, and I think I'd change the Arab-Israeli situation, and I'd probably, But we aren't, and we are, but we don't know we are. That's the predicament. If we were, we'd know. Like Christ said, had ye but faith, ye could move mountains. The predicament is that if you had that degree of faith, you'd know why you put the mountain there in the first place. See, so there's a constant working on yourself to turn this pain into wisdom, to turn it into wisdom. That's the way you work with it. And back, yes. My personal feelings about organized religions. I think in the history of humankind, there have been many, many beings who have broken through their minds into deeper truth and deeper wisdom and the mystic reality, I'd call it. And what that is unspeakable. And when they function among other people or come back or whatever they do, they find metaphors to describe the indescribable. And that all of organized religious traditions are really metaphorical systems of fingers pointing at the unspeakable, really. Whether you call it empty or the one or God or Allah or Ram or whatever. These are all fingers pointing at the moon, if you will. They're not the moon. And most of them are made up of practices that are designed to take you beyond themselves. like theoretically, Christianity is designed to allow you to recognize that I am in you and you are in me, as Christ said. I and my Father are one, that there's only one of it. I mean, he was, in the sense, a supporter of the basic tenet, there is only one God. The predicament is that the mystic root of a religion is then transmitted to people who don't have the full direct experience themselves. And they then build a structure designed for people who have not had that experience. And they often become what you'd call a priest class in the religion. And in a way, you could see it's the beginning of doubt, in a sense. It's the beginning of that place of doubt. And the priest class, often because of their lack of faith in the Spirit, starts to invest in the world. And in the world, the priest gets power by becoming an intermediary between the supplicant and the one. And so Christianity is different than Christ. Christianity is an instrumental vehicle through which you can get to. And the predicament was, historically, that so many people came to the church to get the juice, and they took it away with them. And since the basic social institution is the individual human heart. It's not the mortar or the books or anything, it's the individual human heart. That if everybody comes to an institution to get something and take it away, pretty soon the institution is somewhat bereft of any juice. So that, for example, I can go to a church where they're going to sing Holy, 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 Lord God Almighty, which is a good Protestant hymn. And I can see them singing it as if it was the shopping list that they're going to take to the grocery store the next day. And if my heart is really open to the living Spirit, I come in and I start to sing that, and it's Holy, 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 Lord God Almighty. And I am reliving the truth of those words. And what I see is that social institutions come and go, but often what happens is it loses its power and then it gets reinvested. And that's what's happening that's interesting in the church. That in a lot of different, like in Judaism with the Havurah movement and the renewal movements and so on, in Reconstructionist movement, in Christianity with the liberation theology, with some of the intense truth of the fundamentalists, not necessarily the prejudices, but the intense truth of the experience. Certainly in the Baptist singing and joy, there is, and now you can go on and on through every religious sect, the religious tradition, there is a reawakening of that living spirit in the religion. And so I think that religious institutions go through periods where they're kind of thin and then they come back because they have all the words and formulas, but nobody knows how to read them. Basically, the maps are all there. They're all maps to go beyond themselves, but most people don't know how to use them. Did that come through, whoever asked that question? You asked that question, yes. Yes, sir. We'll just take a few more and then we'll... our relationship with the Native Americans, I assume you're talking about. Well, I sure as hell feel that I am part of the group that owes them an apology, I would say, for a basically genocidal strategy. I think that we, who we were Europeans, came over with a very autistic point of view, and we saw them as impediments to what we thought we needed to be free. And that when you do violence to somebody else to get what you want, you don't really have it. That's the problem. That the reason we don't have part of the sickness of our culture at this moment rests in the fact that we have never acknowledged the extent to which we have been insensitive to another human being's predicament in order to get what we want. And now, as the ecological situation becomes so weird and unstable, and we realize that it's the result of our minds being so out of connection with the world in which we live, we start to look around for wisdom traditions that can help us. And these people have those wisdom traditions, which it was as if at a certain level, beings are connected, and then they get caught in their minds, and then when they get caught in their minds, they can do incredible violence to systems, and in fact destroy the whole situation, until finally they realize they have got to come back into the deeper wisdom, perhaps, or they don't, and they take everybody with them. So I would say that I'm not going to romanticize. The Native Americans have a hell of a lot of problems now, and they've in many ways lost a lot of the beauty, but I am with people like Orville Looking Horse, who was the carrier of the pipe for the Lakota, a dear friend, and when I'm with him, I feel like I'm with, in Yiddish we call it a mensch. I'm with a person who's a real being. I'm with a person who is like my guru, or like Tibetan lamas I've met, I feel there is deep wisdom in those traditions. And I'll take wisdom anywhere I find it. Okay. Yes. How do you feel, how do you deal with the turmoil in the world and how it gathers in your body if you're sensitive? I would just say that you work to regain the balance so you don't collect it. The collecting of it is what'll do you in. It's got to come and be fully felt and yes, and then let go, and let go, and let go. And the maturing of awareness allows one, like if you say to me at this moment, are you happy? I would answer, yeah, I'm happy. If you also ask me, are you sad? I would say, yeah, I'm sad. Because to not be sad when people like us are watching their children die of malnutrition in the world, or seeing what happened in Waco, or seeing what happens in Bosnia, or anything like that, to deny that in order to be happy makes you crazy, finally. You can't do it. You go into denial. You close your heart down in order to be able to do that. You look away from suffering. And yet, if you just get obsessed with suffering, you have also looked away from joy. You've looked away from the beauty and the balance and the emptiness and the love and the grace and the fact that we can get together. All those things. And so you keep working with those balances all the time. And you don't hold on. You keep coming back to your breath, or coming back to the emptiness, or coming back to the center again and again. Oh my God, it's too much. I can't take it. Who you are can't take it. Who you are is it. So sometimes I can't take it forces you to expand yourself into the next level. Because the minute I hear I can't take it, I think, who do I think I am that can't take it? Instead of thinking it's something I can't take. Instead of treating myself as that solid, I use that experience to show where I'm holding on to being, because I'm ripping off the scene in order to feel pain and pity and righteousness and everything. And it's not interesting enough place to stand. That's the harshest way I would say it. Boy. Okay. Where does creativity fit into all of this? First, one way of saying it is the entire universe is a creative act. In fact, everything you're doing every moment is a creative process. But who you think you are isn't. Who you think you are is a lawful unfolding. You're being had. You're a conditioned process going on, actually. So a lot of what we think, I need to be creative, forget it. Because even the thought I need to be creative is already conditioned into you. So you'll say it, and then everything you'll do will be conditioned too. How do you ever get out of that? You get out of that by getting out of your somebodyness as a place you're stuck in, as I'm a creative artist. Like if you take say, Mozart's music, or Cézanne as a painter. I mean, just as two examples. What you sense, the greatness in those beings, like in Mozart, is so clear that he was really a scribe. He was listening to planes of consciousness where that sound was, and he was scribing it, he was writing it down. The experience of him as creator wasn't what the issue was. He didn't get in the way of the whole process. He just took it down as fast as he could. And there is a process where when you get out of the way, the whole creative force of the universe keeps expressing itself through the way you walk, talk, dance, paint, write, whatever your thing is. And when you hear something that has come through such a person, and if you're lucky, you hear it coming through not only a composer that's like that, but an artist that's performing it that's like that. Like when I hear the Shania played by Bismillah Khan or something like that, he's a very religious man. This is his active devotion. He is opening upward and bringing the sound through him. And what happens is, as I listen to it, it takes me into the place he's hearing it from, rather than focusing on, isn't Bismillah Khan a wonderful musician, or isn't that a great composition? Do you hear that? So that a painting or any creative act becomes a manifestation of the deeper wisdom of the universe, and all we do is keep standing out of the way in different ways and letting it channel through our unique form. Is that dealing with your question? Okay. Let's see. Okay. So let's be quiet for a couple of minutes together. Focus on the way we are together or even merged within the silence. Without changing or stopping anything, sensations, fatigue, or mind moving, or sounds, or sensations of the air on the skin, whatever. Just embrace all of that within some kind of vast ocean of awareness, just resting. Think about the ocean and the waves on the surface of an ocean or a lake, and how the waves rise up, and they're part of the ocean, but they are separate waves, and then they dissolve back into the ocean. And for a moment, see the waves as your thoughts, as your sensations, as my words, as your feelings, as your identities, and keep coming back into the ocean out of which all these phenomena arise. Another wave. Let the wave dissolve back into the ocean. That awareness has no boundaries. It's not defined by your body or this room or any form whatsoever. It's just awareness. Within that ocean are all waves. So you can see within this vast ocean of awareness so many forms that are lost in separateness and are suffering. And when we are fortunate enough to be able to come together to remember a little bit of who we are together, and can do this because partly of the systems in which we live. We express our appreciation in part by sharing what we are with those who are suffering. By allowing your heart to open to the beings that are suffering. I will say 4 phrases that are traditional phrases. And after each one, if you're comfortable with it, we can repeat it together. May all beings everywhere be free from suffering. May all beings everywhere be free from suffering. May all beings everywhere be peaceful. May all beings everywhere be happy. May all beings everywhere be free.